I mean, do you know who Graham Hancock is?
I love them. Yeah.
Mm, like, who's to say that that ancient civilization that he talks about weren't capable of something like that?
I wonder about that, like Atlantis or the people even around that time, like the I don't know who the Denisovans, whoever they were, but I actually I'm kind of working on a screenplay about that, and I wonder if they had electricity. I think like the Atlantis Atlas, the king of Mauritania, who they apparently named Atlantis after, and the Atlantic Ocean after,
Mm.
uh, developed the first globe. He's credited with building the first globe, and so I think that means that they were the first to circumnavigate the world and to know that it was round. And I wonder if they had, in my theory, in my movie, and in my dreams, I think like, oh, maybe they had radio. Maybe they were able to communicate with their boats like over long distances. I and then like maybe they had maybe they had like Tesla cannon. Maybe they had like lightning rod, like they could shoot arc electricity, because electricity is not that complex. You know, the Baghdad battery in
Mm.
ancient Egypt, they could produce light bulbs and stuff in the pyramids. There's no smoke in or fire marks in any of the pyramids because they've got images of like holding these big batteries. What you do is you take a clay pot with an iron rod wrapped with copper wire, and then you fill it with vinegar, and it produces an electrical charge. And you link up a bunch of those pots together, and you can produce a really powerful electrical charge. And
Mm.
like Zeus is credited with shooting lightning and controlling lightning, so that makes me think that he had access to some sort of electricity and just told people it was magic.
Yeah, I've never considered that before. Actually, that being because yeah, as soon as you start to consider like because the Graham Hancock talks in I'm just sort of at the tail end of Fingerprints of the Gods, and then I want to move on to some of his other work. But I wanted to start with the first book when I started reading his stuff. And once you start thinking about the idea that all of these ancient creation myths were based on pretty real events, because like he kind of alludes to the idea in Fingerprints of the Gods that a lot of these kind of like catastrophic like creation events like volcanoes and tidal waves and rising seas were all like actual events, and that this is like the closest thing we have to memory of these things. And then when he did his work with Randall Carlson, and they discovered that there was some like seriously big asteroid impacts around 14,000 and 11,000 years ago that like they believe started and ended the last ice age. Although I know there's like a Utah thing where they think that we're still coming out of the end of the last ice age, but like the globe was actually like experiencing all these like catastrophic events. And that like we as soon as you start to consider that those are potentially like based on very real events, then your mind can really start to run, and they're like, right, well, what other creation myths and like gods and demigods myths are like also based on like real things?
Yeah, have you heard of the Vimana?
No, I
There
don't
were
think
these
so.
there's these ancient flying machines, and apparently there's a sultan, the Arabian Nights. I think this story is based off of a guy that would fly around in his Vimana, this king, and he had like they said like he had his entire, I don't know if his entire palace or his entire kingdom on a flying ship, but he must have had it. When I think about that, I think hot air balloons probably were very common. When I think of like the angels and the demons of the biblical history, they could fly, and I think they had hang gliders, and they had like that kind of like gliding tech, but they just told people they could fly because they were like, you know, taking advantage of these people. Um, and the Vimana, maybe they had a bunch of hot air balloons and they would fly these giant platforms around. That's fascinating to me. And they
Mhm.
would like, yeah, the story of the Vimana is pretty cool.
I mean, you look at the Nazca lines, and you you had to have been able to see, like someone had to have been able to look at that from the air for them to have bothered to make that on the ground. You know, unless they legit believe that it's for the gods to see. But I can't see people dedicating something like that without being able to like look at it themselves. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
they're too accurate to do without. I would think that to do without seeing it from above. They're so like organized and structured, and what you really don't even see what it is until you get high up.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I've seen some photos that people have taken from like planes and whatnot from like 10,000 feet, and at like that point, you get like a real idea of like not only like the scale of these things, but just like how that's the only vantage point. Like even if you're on like a mountain nearby, you still don't get the same like idea of how they look from like right above them.
And what's a hot air balloon? It's like a big canvas Could be animal skin, could be cotton. I don't know. You could just make a big canvas and then you heat the air up with fire and it floats. And if people, they all they did was sit around and stare at the sky. I mean, they basically had all the time in the world over millennia, thousands and tens and hundreds of probably hundreds of thousands of years to figure this, to experiment and do this stuff. I'd be blown away if they didn't have at least hot air balloon tech. And if you put electricity into that, I don't know if they really ever got into orbit. I've never seen any evidence that they escaped the atmosphere, but I'm almost undoubtedly that they were flying.
Yeah, I mean, like there's the thing that one of the things that like really like convinced me that Graham Hancock's work was like credible was when he starts talking about the Piri-Reis map, and it's a map of the globe drawn in like 1300, like before Columbus had like landed in America, and I think it was then anyway, but it was like somewhere in the Middle Ages, and the map, the guy who drew it, Piri-Reis, he said that it was based on older maps that were from the Library of Alexandria, and they have like perfect like dimensions of like the edges of all the continents, like because latitude's super easy to measure because all you need is the sun, but longitude is a bitch. Like it's super difficult to calculate. We only figured that out in like the late 1700s. And yet this map that's based on maps that were some thousands of years old was totally accurate to like the contours of the edges of the continents. And like if they were able to figure that out, like something that took us until like the late 17th or the late 18th century, like I think it's inconceivable to think that they didn't at least have some sort of like hang glider technology or hot air balloons or something. Like if they were sophisticated enough to work out a machine that calculated longitude at sea, then surely they should have been able to fly.
Yeah, and it makes me think that they had physics, that they'd started to experiment with like complex mathematics, and maybe I keep thinking that they hoarded knowledge and stored it on the island of Atlantis and like kept it in the palace. At least this is how I write the story. And when the mud flood came, when the tidal wave just surged mud up over the palace and destroyed everything, all that knowledge was lost, and some of it escaped. Like some knowledge escaped into Eastern Africa, into Egypt, and into Turkey, to the what's that big temple in Turkey called?
Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, Göbekli Tepe, where all these people, it looks like they harbored after the cataclysm, but maybe not all the information. And if they're mapping the globe, that takes some serious. I think it takes math. I don't know, to be honest. I'm definitely not an expert.
It's got to require math, because like the machine to calculate longitude, like the most difficult thing is to get it to work at sea. Because something to do with like the way the waves like screw with the machine while it's moving, and also like to be able to calculate that stuff, you have to have like serious mathematics. But even just the amount of like calculations it required to build things like the pyramids, like you gotta be they have to have had seriously complex and accurate like construction and mathematics in order to make something like that.
The way they would cut the stone, especially. There's the theory that makes the most sense to me about how they build those is that they have like wooden trellises and lattices around it as they were building, and that they would flood like these ramps with water, and then they'd put the blocks in the water. They'd actually cut the blocks in the water, and the blocks would be floating, and then they'd be able to turn the blocks and cut them as they would turn them, and they would keep the workers cool while they would work. And then they'd be covered, and then they'd float the blocks up. There's these like videos of this on YouTube, and they can show the actual construction. They'd float the blocks up these like channels, and then like drop some wood down to stop it, and then they'd float them up the rest of the way. And when they got up there, they'd drop another like stopper down, and then they'd float them up, and that's how they would get the blocks up.
Whoa, I didn't know that. Sounds seriously cool. I have to check that out.
Yeah, and I think that the pyramids were like filled with water. You see these like tiny little channels, like angular holes dug from like chamber to chamber, and like they're obviously not for people. People don't fit through them, and so I'm imagining that they use them like batteries. Like they tipped them with gold for some reason. The top tip, it could have just been a spiritual thing, but gold's also a superconductor. And I've heard that they're above like what are they called? These telluric current pathways in the earth, so that they're tapping into like some vibrative energy field. I don't know if they use the water in the pyramids actually to enhance the electricity, but other than that, I cannot figure for the life of me what they would have been used for. Like they say they're tombs, but there's water channels and stuff, and the fluid channels. I don't know what those would have been for.
Yeah, I mean, like there's that theory that those like the shafts that are cut at those specific angles are like a mathematical kind of like game, because of the way the angles kind of line up with like different like mathematical formulas, like especially I think the ratios involved in like the actual like shape of the pyramid itself is like all centered around the number pi. And there's a theory that this was like a message through the ages to tell people that they understood mathematics in a way that could never be lost.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's a cool one. I mean, like there's so much speculation you can go into about ancient Egypt in itself fascinates me. I mean, like, have you heard the story that Napoleon spent a night inside the Great Pyramid, right down in the King's Chamber, I think it is, and he came out in the morning like looking like white as a ghost and freaked out as fuck, and then like would never talk about it.
Oh, wild. They would like cut people's brains open, the Egyptians, and they found the eye of Horus, what they called it was basically the pineal gland in the middle of the brain, and where the DMT is produced in this pineal gland in the middle of your brain, and they were so drawn to that thing, that gland, that they created a holy symbol out of it. Like if you look at it from the side, and they called it the eye of Horus, the third eye.
Yeah.
I
didn't know that's what
human brains.
Yeah, I didn't know that's what that represented. That's really cool.
Isn't that nuts? Yeah, look at a pineal gland, a brain dissected, and you see the eye of Horus. It looks like the eye of Horus.
Oh, that's the same one that you got above the what do you call it? Above the pyramid on the dollar sign, right?
Yeah, I think so. Let me look. Yeah, on the American, like the all-seeing eye.
Yeah,
is it the eye of Horus? That's freaky, dude.
I'm not sure. I like, that's just pure speculation right now.
No, it's a more of just a regular looking eye. Isn't that crazy that on the American dollar there's like the eye of Mordor staring at us? What the fuck is that supposed to represent? That they're always watching?
Maybe. I mean, maybe it was. Yeah, I don't know. You have to ask the Masons. They're the ones they were all Masons, were they not? Like all the founding fathers.
And there's a bunch of Latin all over the dollar. It's crazy how like cryptic it is.
Was Latin still spoken at that time
when they made these Federal Reserve notes? I don't think so. This is like in the last 100 years that they. Although I don't know the history of the all-seeing eye atop the pyramid. That's on a pyramid. It's the American dollar. It's the all-seeing eye over a pyramid.
Yeah.
Like what do the pyramids have to do with the United States?
I have no idea. I mean,
maybe someone does.
Yeah, I mean, like I just want to Google that right now. Actually, let's have a look at this. Why is there a pyramid on the dollar?
It's crazy. Maybe I can bring one up and look at it.
It says the pyramid was seen as a kind of human structure that lasted out the ages. But the pyramid and the eye wasn't on the dollar bill until 1935.
Wow. You know why they added it?
Just looking on Wikipedia here. It's called the Eye of Providence. Meant to represent divine providence, whereby the eye of God watches over humanity.
Oh, that's supposed to be the eye of God.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up an image of it on my monitor. It's so nuts.
Yeah, isn't it? Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and to our mailing list. And don't forget, my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. You'll find the link in the description below. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.